Hi, welcome to another episode of the Leadership Enigma. You know, Professor Tony O'Driscoll has already said to me on one episode that meaning is the new money. And perhaps that at the heart of the conversation today. How do we actually connect as human beings? Why would we connect? What is importance? Well, you definitely want to listen to this episode where I've got the wonderful John Spencer with me, currently the chair of urban warfare studies at the Modern War Institute, 25 years within the US military, author of Connected Soldiers. So if anyone knows why and when you've got to connect people when the stakes are high, I think John's going to be able to help us with that. So come back to me just after this.
You're listening to The Leadership Enigma, powered by Transform Performance International, a podcast for the insatiably curious to explore the power of human-centered leadership to create real momentum for positive and sustainable change. Whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts, and disruptors as we discover that success leaves clues. Now, here's your host, Adam Pacifico.
Hey, it's a big warm welcome to John to the Leadership Enigma. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me, Adam.
I could see you already making some notes as you were listening to that introduction there. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, hang on, which one of those categories do I fit into? So I don't know. You tell me, John. Listen, I gave a little bit of a précis of an illustrious background, including 25 years within the US military, but I've never done that justice, have I? So tell the listeners a little bit about you. How have we got to this point?
So I'm a guy who joined the military at the age of 17, had an amazing career, really the Where's Waldo of experiences, from being a private lowest worker to advising a 4-star general in charge of the U.S. military or U.S. Army. The 2 combat tours, one for the invasion of Iraq, which was a very different experience. And then later I went back in charge of a major company for us. That's about 150 people in a very big battle in Baghdad in 2008. I'm a student of leadership. I'm a student of warfare. I just love learning.
Now, you've been on 2 combat tours. I'm trying now to think what that even might be like. All I've got to offer here is 6 years as an operational police officer, where things got a little hairy, but those certainly weren't 2 combat tours. I'm not looking for details, John. What I'm looking for, the impact of 2 combat tours on you. You as a person, what did you learn about yourself when you're in an incredibly high stakes environment like that and your life and the lives of others are literally at risk? Because when we talk about leaders and business, yes, the stakes are high, but lives aren't at risk. You've been in that place where lives are at risk, John. I'm keen to understand. I'm an incredible, for the service that you've given to your country, but what's been the impact on you?
I mean, it's had a real impact. I mean, war is the worst human endeavor we can ever partake in. But adversity also exposes appreciation, putting everything into context, that perspective. Same thing with my military career, and I'm sure in your policing time, is to gain that perspective of other people around the world, around issues. So my combat tours, especially as a leader, and this is what I put a lot into the book about my own challenges as the burden of command is what we call it. Yeah. You do have the responsibility of so many for their life and death every day. But also it is the true test, right? It's for us, it's the Super Bowl. So it puts all these leadership theories, all these aspects to the true test, so that, if everything is important, then nothing's important. And I learned in combat that leaders are priorities from day to day to overall. And that was really some of the things that, I had been taught that get shown to, okay, let's put this into practice. What works, what doesn't work, what's most important when leading people in the most, where their lives are at stake.
Now, when you go on to operational duty, and again, I'm drawing on my very modest, personal experience as well. The rubber meets the road, and that's probably a dreadful way of describing things. But really, you're putting that theory into practice. What kind of leader did you find that you were when the bullets were flying, literally. John, what kind of leader did you become? Because then there's that muscle memory, there's that instinct and that automated response when you're making split-second decisions. Did you work out what kind of leader you became in that instant?
I think so. I sure hope so. I think the rubber meets the road is a great analogy. I mean, the bottom of our boots are rubber, and we were hitting the road.
In some ways, you're right. Yeah.
I actually think that when the bullets were flying wasn't the leadership challenge. We
Right.
do a really good job in preparing for those moments. I think the other moments are the leadership challenges of how to inspire people when times are going bad, when the mission isn't as clear. And really, in my second tour in 2008, that's where I really discovered what's the best of me as a leader. You put in actually practice what I was preaching all my career, that you had to be a leader that inspired people to do things. It wasn't good enough. And people have this misconception about the military that we just tell people to do things and they do it. And that's the farthest thing from the truth, really. And that's the weakest form of leadership. I had to show my soldiers that I was willing to sacrifice with them, to give directions, but also give the purpose and the meaning of why I was telling them what they're doing, why we were there. So I learned so much in this trial of leadership. And even though I served for 25 years, that one tour, not even my first tour, which was more kinetic, more enemy contact. It was the second one where you're dealing with so many challenges at once, where your leadership style really gets put to the test.
John, this takes me back almost now to, I think it was the first ever episode. I had a good friend on the show. He was the former head of undercover policing for the Metropolitan Police, commander, very senior police officer for the Olympics. Talked about commander's intent and talked about the ability to set the goal of the operation, but then giving the trust and the autonomy and the empowerment to your troops on the ground to change things as they see fit in order to meet the goal. So they know what the goal is. It might be take the hill. And I'm oversimplifying, and forgive me, John, I don't mean this, but it's take the hill. But then when the bullets are flying and the muck is flying and everything is hell for leather, were you able to find the space to allow those soldiers, boots now on the ground, do what you got to do in order to meet the imperative? I'm trusting you. I'm empowering you. You're still accountable. There are rules of engagement, but be agile.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is it is the most powerful form of a military system, but also any organization, is if you can gain that shared understanding of what the overall goal is. So actually, in my worst leadership experience of my life, which was I'm taking a company that had been completely broken down, it was really Lord of the Flies. You have to prioritize what you're doing. My number one daily priority was to ensure that everybody understood what they were being asked to do, both individually, but as a group, what we were doing there. And then the why, because the intent really encompasses, we say that, just give them your intent of why and what, but really focus on the what, like, okay, take that hill, right? And they can figure out many ways to do it. But if you don't give them the meaning of why take that hill, why sacrifice for that hill, and I don't mind the stories. I think stories are a way people learn no matter what organization you live in. So we have our stories, like Chamberlain at Gettysburg, where there's one hill called Little Round Top, where he has to take it, and it's a suicide mission. He has to hold it. If not, the entire war is lost. And he explains that in a matter of a minute to his men, like, look, I know what I'm asking you to do. Hold this hill at all costs. But if you don't, everything is lost. That's a really, a very almost simple story, but with the powerful meaning. When I was in my worst situation, and I didn't even know it at the time, that became the bedrock, explaining to people what I wanted them to do, but why I wanted it. So the intent was what and why.
So that's interesting. There may well be people who are new leaders, new people leaders, or people who are working with teams that they might describe as dysfunctional. And you talked about, tough leadership experience for you was a group of men who were in bad shape as a team. Is that a fair comment? And
absolutely.
I'm now thinking about Heartbreak Ridge, aren't I, with Clint Eastwood? But I'm just thinking, but if you're going in there as a leader and you've got that kind of challenge with a team, just help us again with what was your priority to try and start to pull that rabble together into a fighting unit.
Yeah. I mean, it was a long list. Actually, I had started making a list. Like, look, when I take over, because I actually got like a week to observe the organization. And this is,
Right.
we're really big in this in the military. When you're taking a new organization, you can't come in day one just firing away at telling people what to do. You have to observe and listen to understand, and then you can prioritize. So I literally was writing down a list of things. And then even on top of that, this major episode happens and everything, it seems like everything's lost. So number one thing I did was bring them all together and say that we were a team, and that we would start from day one as an organization, addressing all this long list of things. So my number one step was to talk to people, because we were leading people. So all my subordinate leaders, so literally like 2:00 in the morning, I pulled them all together and I'm like, look, I know we're in a really bad place. We were considered the black sheeps of this entire brigade, massive organization. But look, This is day one, and we as a team are going to fix all these things. We're going to come back better. And then day one, morning one, was starting out with, look, you will not let anybody go outside this wire. And I'm talking to junior leaders at this point, without they understanding what they're doing and what's the mission of the day, and why they're doing it. So you have to explain to them why we're doing what we're doing today, but why we're even here in this place.
So in many ways, you were very curious, you were listening and observing what was actually wrong. And then you actually pulled them in to help problem solve with you. You didn't just come in and say, right, this is what we're going to do, and here's the answer A, B, C. It sounds like you actually said, here are the obvious issues we're all facing. We have to do this together.
Absolutely. And then there are techniques that we learn in that moment. Like, so what is one of the issues with, it's just, what is the group norms? What are the standards we're going to follow? So I don't tell people that. I ask all of the junior leaders, like, what is our standard? What is wrong and what is right? What is left and right? It isn't, as a leader, I'm not telling them to do it. We as a group, because war, just like any team organization, is a group function. And this is the theme of, cohesion and of my book. Yes, it's made up of complex individuals, which everyone has a different motivation, a drive in them. But in the military just exposes this, but so does professional sports, high functioning teams, is that you can only accomplish your mission as a team. So when I would ask them, like, what's our standard? Because clearly they hadn't been following one, but they know what it is, especially in the military. So that was one of my first questions, like, okay, that we are a team, that we can only do this as a team. Like, even me, the burden of command, you can only do it as a team. And then what is our standard? What is our normal? If I can get them that shared understanding, which is a huge part of a leader, my time was spent as a higher level leader, was getting shared understanding from every level.
Now, John, you worked your way up through the ranks through your 25-year career. So you went from the lower ranks into the more senior ranks, into the leadership ranks. Now, that's always a challenge, isn't it? What was the biggest challenge for you as you started to move away from able to be everyone's pal and everyone's friend, now to being in a position where you're in charge and you're accountable? Tell me a little bit about that journey for you.
Sure. I mean, I started as a private, like you said, and went to the non-commissioned officers, which are kind of our middle management. And then I became an officer. So what it gave me was a tacit knowledge of the roles within the organization. So it almost freed my cognitive load, because the military does really good about that whole thing with leading, peer leadership. And they move you around a lot. And that's one of the goals, like just so you're not leading people you had built interpersonal relationships with, although that you're still doing that. It gave me that ability to free up my cognitive load. Like, I know what your role is. Now, where it would kind of rub people sometimes, like, he thinks he knows my job, and actually I do, but I also, now I'm at a leadership role, trying to, with an understanding and a more cognitive load, right? Because leaders are learners, right? If you don't know yourself, and if you don't know your organization, it's going to be it's just more stress, and you won't hit that higher level of performance. So when I got into leadership roles, the complexity was increased, but I could also help junior leaders, like my platoon leaders, like even my lower level leaders are like, look, they, so there's many forms of power, and we talk about them in the U.S. military, and one's legitimate power. It's like, I put you in a position, I should now follow you. But the highest form of power is reverent power, which is I have their respect based on my experiences, based on my actions day to day. So because I had served as up through the ranks, I come in with a certain level of reverent power, but that can be lost very quickly.
I can imagine.
So I try to build on those with the way you talk to people, whether it's the lowest level person or the even senior leaders.
I think listeners are going to be fascinated as you're talking about this, because it is just so relevant to leadership per se. Anyone leading a small team, medium team, large team, huge organization, no one started as the CEO. He or she worked up through the ranks, moved from the individual contributor to the first time leader, perhaps, and then more senior leadership and executive leadership, whatever we want to call it. But let's move on to this issue of connectedness. I mentioned at the start there that one of my guests said meaning is the new money. You've already spoken about how powerful meaning is to galvanizing even a disparate group of people. And that was, I think, on your list when you said the rabble. I am thinking of movies, and you have to forgive me, John, with this. But talk to me about this. Your book was Connected Soldiers. So talk to me about this, the power of connection, because this is so relevant to every leader. How do we connect people on a human level? Why would we bother doing it? And I've got other questions, John. I don't want to overload, but kind of take me on the basics first. What do you mean by this connectedness in humans?
So it actually has like so many meanings, just the word connected in the title, in the meaning of it. It starts off with a journey about how we as high performing teams can survive. And throughout the history of leading people in combat or in high stressful, we know that cohesion, the bonds between each individual, there's something called social cohesion, which is that bond where I'm willing to die or experience harm, whatever, for the person to my left and right. And then there's task cohesion, where we all agree that if we don't work together as a team, we can't even survive. We can't accomplish the goal that we all agree needs to be done. It all rests on connections, right? It all rests on how well I know the person to my left and right, how well I know the leadership, the meaning of the organization, the why. It's about connections. In the military, we've learned how to form those connections, the cohesion between soldiers.
Right.
I talk about in the book, though, is that because of the world changes, so does the military, so does every organization. And because of social media and internet and things like that, there are new connections that weren't there in the past. So when I took an organization off to war, I took them to work, they were disconnected from their other social support networks, and they formed a family. You can have multiple families, but we have things in the military where when you go off to war, you have this combat family, you have a tribe, you have community, which is literally the lifeblood of survival as a team.
Right.
But connections of the world now means that I can connect home, and just like my wife did in 2018, I stayed at home with our family. She went off to war, but we could talk to her every day. That's the new world we live in, where connections are important, but there's so many connections. I talk about in the book where you have to understand what connective functions or what activities as an organization have to be done as a group, while they're also connected and have a foot, like we all do, right? Like we have a virtual persona now. We have a virtual reality or a world we live in, but we also have real world that we're dealing with day to day. It's those balance and the connections.
Now, this is fascinating, John, because I've never thought about it this way, but as you're talking about it now, I'm really intrigued, because you're right. We've got the human connection with the team, and I've worked with leaders who have still not properly connected with their team, yet have worked with them for multiple years. And we have this omni connection, don't we? Where we're all connected to friends and family by platform. So whether that's a YouTube or a Facebook or a TikTok, look, I sound as if I know what I'm talking about, or LinkedIn, and we're both on LinkedIn. So how should a leader approach that? Because I think that's fascinating. Everyone has connections, both face-to-face and in real life, but also in the omni world. how do you approach that then?
So first, the leader has to understand that these are all positives, right? There's also there's a positive and a negative to everything in leading, but to understand that people desire connections. Like we're social beings by nature, right? So when you go to work, you want to have attribute meaning to that group, but then you also have connections to your family and to whatever matters most to you.
Right.
So this thing that has continued to come about as I talk about my book, I talk about in war where the group who is fighting together needs to stay connected and build the bonds while they're also dealing with the stresses and connections of their other families. So in the book, let's put this to reality, right, John? When you eat together, you're actually bonding as a group. It has nothing to do with work, but you're bonding as a group, breaking bread. When we would go out on a mission or work and come back, if you talk about that mission at that moment, it actually is a part of the bonding process.
Right.
So we know there's two things that create bonds between people. One is shared hardships, like doing hard things together and accomplishing things. It literally bonds you for life, depending on if it's combat or team building experiences I'm sure you've done. And the other one is just time together, getting to know each other, interpersonal time, transformational, not transactional.
Right.
This, because if you understand that people want community, they want tribe, they want meaning in their life, then the day-to-day practices that you do at work or whatever, for us, it's in combat, have to translate to a purpose of bonding them together as a team, but also giving them the meaning that they desire. Like I want to be a part of a highly functioning team. I want to be on the best team, right? We had this big thing on the military, like everybody else is not good. You're the best. Doesn't matter what level you're working on.
Not competitive then.
Right. Great. But I also want a leader, right? So back to that power, like my identity as a leader, I know that as a private, as a former, entry-level person, I wanted a leader that I wanted to follow.
Right.
It's all about identity and connections that are so important to the meaning that is life.
I've got to ask this question, John, because am I right in thinking that the pandemic happened after your book?
Absolutely, yeah. So I wrote this book before COVID, yeah.
Okay, so let me just ask it, because I always say to people that I don't want to be COVID focused all the time, but this is the fascinating question, I think. I'm trying to applaud myself here now, aren't I? But this is the question in my mind, John, is, okay, through COVID, that forced us to go into a virtual environment where we all probably increased our presence online. And we're now in a hybrid environment where we haven't all gone back to face, but we're not all in the land of virtual. So in some ways, has this even strengthened some of the propositions from your book about managing the connections of people face to face and virtually? Because we have to live in this hybrid world now. So many leaders are asking, how do I lead in hybrid? I've got a team across the world who I only ever see online, and I've got a team who I see, 3 days a week in the office. How do I connect that team who are having totally different experiences? Is that a fair question, John, or am I rambling?
100% a fair question.
Okay.
And COVID taught the world that we need physical connections. Like we can go into the virtual world and there are a lot of positives. Actually, one of the strongest both criticisms of my book, but also the validation of my book was a young soldier, right? So I have to take feedback.
Yeah.
Who said, you misinterpreted that I was saying that you should just not be connected while you're doing these high missions. He said, I have close friends that I'm able to stay in contact through social media. And I said, that validates the point. You have close friends that you formed relationships with in the present, in presence of them through time together, through school, whatever. Yeah. And it is, you can stay connected. But I think COVID taught us that literally as human beings, right? Because look at the increase in depression, mental health, all these issues. A weird experiment for us in the military was when we took young people in one of the academies. I won't say which one it was.
Right.
And said, hey, look, normally this is a completely bonding experience. It's the purpose of the institute. But because of COVID, You all are going to stay in single rooms by yourselves, come out to go to class, and that's it.
Right.
And it was stopped after multiple suicides.
Wow.
Humans need physical connections. And I agree with your statement, though. It doesn't have to be that you're not connected, but you have to take advantage of the actual time together to create these bonds that are teamwork, that are life. It's how you use the time you do have together that builds on that you can keep important through virtual connections, but you have to have that physical presence and make it mean something. Because I've seen people where they, okay, we're going to meet in the office today. Like, okay, we're here, right? But we're not doing bonding things together. We might all be sitting in front of a terminal, although he's to my left and he's over there. That's not physical presence.
No, do you know what? We're experiencing that ourselves. I think another clients are as well, because they're trying to get people back into the office, and people are like, well, why am I coming into the office? And people say, well, that's your place of work. And they say, well, no, why am I coming in? Am I just going to do 6 Zoom calls? Well, I might as well do that at home. And you may even have a better setup. So there's that increased tension, or that additional question now, tell me why we're coming into the office. What are we doing? And I think there's a human question there, isn't there, about how are we connecting? What are we going to do together? Is that also fair?
Absolutely. Like I said, back to, so all these leadership basics that we always talk about, they had to be put to the test. If you don't know the people you're working with, and know them at an interpersonal level, the relationship of working together will be different. Doesn't mean it can't work. People pull it off all the time. It won't be the most effective team. The most effective teams in the world are ones who know each other. They don't have to like each other, right? So I get this sometimes too. Like, I don't like that guy. Like, look, this is about knowing each other and knowing the team that you're working with, and getting that shared understanding. So even if you bring them together, like, why are you coming in? So we can know each other as a team. It's an opportunity for leaders to also gain that shared understanding. Like, I understand, because everybody needs a difference. Like, you understand a person's, what they want out of the life, what they want out of the work, what they want out of, you get that gain understanding. But it's actually physiological, standing in front of somebody. It's all different. And this COVID taught us this, right? There is something lost in virtual connections that in physical connections, whether it's interpersonal skills, whether it's non-verbal communication, all of it, but it's how you spend that time. Right. So if I agree with you, if you told me to come into work, like, why do I need to come into work? Like, what are we doing I can't do virtually? Well, one of the things is bonding as a team. It's really hard to do that virtually.
No, I agree. I just want to kind of go back to when you were a leader within the military. How much time did you spend actually just getting to know people? Just the individuals, who they are, what made them tick, what were their aspirations, what was their family circumstances? How much time did you spend on that?
So it depended on, I went up in the ranks, It's harder, right? So I have 200 plus workers. The amount of time I had to spend with each individual. So of course, I had my own personal team in all my leadership situations, and I got to know them intimately.
Right.
And then I got to know my junior level leaders intimately.
Right.
But every interaction I had with somebody in my organization had to be real. And that's something I learned too in 25 years, is like, you can spend literally 1 minute with an individual, and it can be real or it can be fake.
Right.
And as a junior leader, I know, like, we have these things about when a general comes around and goes, where are you from? Texas. Oh yeah, Texas. And he moves on. But it was every interaction that I had with, no matter who it was, and it could give that person meaning. Like, the 1 minute I spend with somebody going, hey, whatever your name is, like, what's your role today? Just the fact that I'm talking to them is a moment, but I can't get to know them. So it's a hard question. Of course, I spent a lot of time with my closest team, getting to know them. And that practice of what I'm doing should then be translated down. And you can check that. You can check how much you know that your leader knows the next level down. Gotcha. And how real they're being.
I'm hearing so many things here, John. You know, I'd had another guest, John Amici, former NBA player, psychologist as well, who said that leadership is energy expensive. That always stuck with me. And I think that's so true. So if you're leading a large organization, can you still connect with people? Yes. Must you? Yes. But be realistic. You're connecting with your immediate team. You're really getting to know them. But isn't there a ripple impact here as well, John, that if that's how you show up as a leader, they're going to show up with the people that they lead. And then they're going to show up with the people that they lead. And in some ways, you're casting a shadow within the organization, which is being replicated throughout the organization.
Absolutely. And I said this every day. I say it even as a father of my own family.
Yeah.
They're always watching. Everything you do and say,
True.
You don't even might even think about it. But if you're in a meeting and you have an outburst or whatever, you could even, it will translate, ripple through the formation. That's why every moment matters, because the leader is the representation of the group as a whole, as the norms and whatever, and it gets translated. So it is crazy how much your actions will be rippled across the organization, or that story will pass. That moment where somebody took a time out of their hands or hand wrote a letter. This is all we know, really great stuff, but how fast it'll ripple throughout the organization. But I will say I broke one of the cardinal rules of leadership in my hardest time, is where I didn't take care of myself.
Right.
Because I felt this burden. And I was not sleeping. I knew the things I wanted to do, but I was not taking care of myself, which then translates to others not taking care of themselves. Right. So lead by example. They're always watching. So in my book, I wanted it to be real, right, about mistakes I made. And that is a huge mistake I made, is that I wasn't taking care of myself.
And what got you back to taking care of yourself? Did you get a little bit of feedback from someone who actually, I've had that myself, from someone who's actually going to give me some pretty fierce feedback in relation to that kind of subject. Is that what happened, or did you have a eureka moment, or how did you get back on track in relation to looking after yourself, as you say?
So it was both. So I had set up a relationship with my immediate leadership to where they felt free enough to say, sir, you need to get some sleep. Or, and enough of those comments came to where, but I also had peer leadership, right? Because in the military, there are others in the same situation as you, or people who had come before you. So I was getting a lot of advice, and those course correction, if you were listening, were there. But I think that most impactful was when the junior leader, one of my, part of my interior team, I had set up that type of relationship where he could, and not worry about me responding harshly, like, sir, you need to get some sleep.
Right. I love this. I'm remembering so many wonderful episodes. I had Danelle Barrett, who's a former Rear Admiral in the US Navy, and she talked about truth to power. And in some ways, that's what you're referencing: truth to power, truth to seniority, truth to the leader, where it's like, sir, you need to really get some sleep.
That takes a lot of work to set up that environment.
Oh yeah.
We call them climates or cultures. But go back to that first day when I said, we are a team. In those opening moments, I was starting to set that culture. Like, we are a team. Like, what are we going to do about all these problems? It wasn't what I, John Spencer, was going to do. Like, I can't do everything. We as a team, it started there, because I was asking them, and that sets that culture of, shared leadership.
Yeah. And in fact, one of the episodes coming up soon is around psychological safety. And so, I'm looking forward to that too, about how does a leader create psychological safety. Definitely an episode for another time, and that's coming in about 2 or 3 weeks. Let me ask you this question. With all of the work you've done and the talks that you're now doing and the book that you've written, and many leaders might be thinking, I'm trying to do something with my team. I'm trying to move us from a working group to a high-performing team. I've got strong characters. We're disparate. We're dysfunctional in some way, or we're not quite a team, or COVID got in the way, whatever it might be. And we're all working on these challenges. What are some of the pieces of advice that you can give to leaders right now to get them started on that connection element to their team, wherever they may be? Get them started, John.
Yeah. So number one, the way you connect with people is to be real. So that is hard conversations. Even if there's already a culture of he's the boss, that person's not the boss. That can be done over a coffee session, a organized event that is put on the calendar with the sole purpose of creating connections, bonds, and build on that. That one amount, that investment in time of the organization will translate if the leader makes sure everybody knows why we are coming together. Like, why are you asking me to come to work? Like, because we're going to have this conversation. I think that's a moment that gets put on, which translates. And then another one that I found, even in a highly this organization that was failing and failing,
Yeah.
even though we were trying to build, is I had to figure out a way to create a win, a moment. Like you can only push a team so long, and they continue, no matter how hard they're working, that they fail. We had it in the military. We created I say it's creating moments. We do team events, like we exercise together and things like that.
Right.
And sometimes the daily practice can become monotonous. You don't understand. Like there are reasons that can be used for this event. So I think the other one is create a win of some type for the organization, and then it has to be known, celebrated throughout the organization. So you can organize that even separate than the work. Whether that's a team building event, you name it, where something's really hard to do, but then they accomplished it, and that's the discussion. Like, we did this, we created a win for ourselves, or it can be work related, but that has to be shared. So teams need winning moments to continue to be motivated to drive forward,
even in adversity. So
Absolutely.
What would your best piece of advice be as well for those who are still leading and operating in a hybrid environment? They're getting some face-to-face time now with some, but they're still virtual with others. And how do we stop people feeling that they're having a very different experience? Because they are. How does a leader still try and create that moment and try and create that connection?
I still think it goes back to, so leaders are communicators.
Yeah.
I believe that in my heart. So even like we're talking virtually now, but it's the nature of the conversation. What are we talking about that can create a shared understanding that I care, that you want meaning out of this, whatever it may be. So just having virtual time together doesn't mean it's actually real time. It's transactional versus transformational. So some of the virtual time, even if it's completely virtual, has to be for that purpose of building the connection between, whether it's team members or boss, subordinate, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It has to be purposeful.
And again,
how many meetings have we gone to that we're having the meeting because this is when we always had the meeting. And we're gonna,
yeah, I'm with you. And I had one conversation very recently actually with a client, and they're very much in that transactional mode, just operating in the day to day. So they're talking to each other a lot, but they're not actually connecting. So actually that really makes sense. John, how do people connect with you? See what I did there? How do they connect with you to continue the conversation, get you involved in their conversation, get hold of the book? How's that possible?
Sure. So I'm on johnspenceronline.com. Okay. I'm on Twitter. You can get the book on Amazon, Connected Soldiers. And interestingly, what I always put into the book if I sign it is stay connected to what matters most.
Right.
And that can be personally and that can be professionally.
Now that you've had 25 years in the military and you've come out, what matters most to you now, John?
Family. My family. And I've had to be shaken. Like my wife got cancer. Sometimes you need adversity to understand what should matter most. And that can even be a conversation from somebody else, like a friend saying, look, you're off track. This should matter most to you. And my family, being a father is my number one purpose.
Right. Well, I do hope all is well with your wife and with your family. I appreciate, again, I have these most amazing candid conversations with people, and in some ways the majority are virtual, but they do feel transformational, not transactional. And maybe that's why I think it's a real privilege because I feel a connection with the people that I speak to. And this is a classic example of that. Here's the unfair question, John. With all of the wisdom that you've got, is there a standout piece of leadership advice that you've given or received in your lifetime that you want to share right now?
Oh, standout piece of advice.
I know it's yes. What you got for us?
I think a piece of advice that didn't get early enough,
right,
is that leaders are learners. If you're not learning is living in general. But as a leader, if you're just doing the same thing over and over and over, you're not learning about your people, your organization, your profession, the science, whatever it is. If you're not learning every day, then you're not leading.
And in some ways, we're not growing.
Right.
Love that. Listen, John, thanks so much for taking the time to come on to the Leadership Enigma. I hope this has been fun for you.
Absolutely. We have connected.
Join us again next week for more tips and strategies on the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show, as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with your host on LinkedIn or visit the dedicated website, www.leadersenigma.com, powered by Transform Performance International, where you can access our exclusive learning, including books, videos, bonus content, assessments, and more. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.